Elizabeth?
Uh-huh.
No, Granny Conaway.
Oh, no. Elizabeth was my great-grandmother, that's right. The way I was reading this. Grandma Caraway, yeah, I forget her name being Elizabeth, because everybody just always said Grandma Caraway.
Yeah.
That,
Are you going to ask questions?
well, I'm gonna start out so they know who we are and what we're doing here.
Okay.
It's Monday, July 9th, 2018, and we are at the home of Jane Hoffman, 8100 Tin Top Highway in Granbury, Texas. My name is Diane Locke, and along with me today are Jake Caraway and Lloyd Dodd. So, tell us about your family and where did they come from?
All right. My mother was born in Parker County on the farm. My father was born in Leroy, or West Texas. It's just north of Waco.
Okay, yeah.
And he was born in 1893. And his father died 3 months before he was born.
Gosh.
But he did have an older brother that was 16 his elder, that was a male model, so to speak, for him. But that's where he was born. And they did not settle in this area until 1911. My grandmother moved to Thorpe Spring so that the two minor children could go to school here.
Okay.
And then they went to that Thorpe Spring Christian College at Thorpe Springs, and that's where he met my mother. They were sweethearts, and as it turned out, they were married 71 years.
Oh, goodness.
So it was a very lasting relationship and very dear. But
What did he do?
Daddy went to school, and when he finished Thorpe Spring College, he applied to the University of Texas,
Okay.
and they accepted his 60 hours, and he was in the School of Engineering there. And while he was there, the university had an ROTC type thing, and he joined that group. And during World War I, they were activated, and he was sent to the border, and their job was to capture Pancho Villa.
Ah,
Of course, they didn't ever catch him. That's another story. But of course, the war ended then, while he was there. And when they deactivated, he was going to go back to school, but his heart was in another place. He wanted to see his sweetheart, so he came back, and they married May the 8th, 1917 in Fort Worth.
Okay.
And that's where all of this settled in here. That's why we're here now.
I see.
Daddy bought this place in 1917. And they farmed, of course, or attempted to farm. It was difficult times.
I was trying to read, how many acres was it they bought?
265.
Okay, because that was a lot of money back then to pay for it.
It really was. And I did an oral history for my daddy, and I found out from that he paid $40 an acre for this land at that
It
time.
was a big amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
It was at that time, yes. And they had some years that were fairly decent years, I suppose, but let's see. My brother was born here. He was 4 years older than I am, and he went to that Hightower school out here.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure just exactly where that is.
It's a herring.
Herring Hightower.
And it was back down, the Herring Cemetery is where Arrowhead Shores is.
Okay.
So I
Well,
figure it's in that vicinity.
Vicinity.
Uh-huh.
Well, he went to school there. It was a very small school.
Mhm.
And he went there through the 4th grade. So, in the meantime, and during that time, they farmed or attempted to farm. Mules,
But he never did the engineering?
no, he never did go back to school. After he married his love of his life, that was it. And they stayed here and worked. And they were a pair that were together just like. Anyway, and they were hard times. This was 1917. And in my querying of him, there were some years that were fairly good years, and 1919 was a fairly good year, and he invested and went into debt, bought mules and equipment and so forth. And he cleared this place, and he cleared it with mules and a plow.
So he would have been in the Mexican-American War, not World War One.
No, it was World War One.
Well, it's World War One in
Yes.
17, okay?
19.
Okay.
And but this field across the road here, it had a rock fence, and Daddy's always been sorry that he did not restore that.
Mhm.
But when he cleared the land, and it must have been a tremendous job to do that, to make it into cultivated
Oh, yeah.
areas.
I remember seeing the rock fence when I was little.
Well, he was just always grieved over that he did not take care of it and maintain it and help it. But he used that for the cultivation for wheat and oats, corn. But I think wheat was the main thing, and then it turned to cotton. And that's when the downfall came, when I was born in 1925. Cotton, they couldn't get a nickel for a bale of hay, for one of those large bale of hay. So things were really, really bad. But just before that, though, Mother was having birthing problems, and Daddy's brother lived in Waco, and they said Mother needed to be close to a hospital. So I was born in Waco during that time because Mother was not doing well. And she had to stay in the hospital 17 days, which I guess was a long time then.
Okay.
But then when I was able, we came back here and stayed here until 1929, when
Correct.
everything went, it was nothing. So Daddy said we were going to starve if they stayed here.
Ah.
They sold cream and what have you. I mean, it was very difficult to make any kind of a living. So his brother in Waco had a large nursery, and he said, "You will come to Waco and you can help me with the nursery." And they gave us a place to live. So I started the 1st grade in Waco. And I remember that very well because I had one pair of shoes. And
And was fortunate to have it.
But I do remember, I remember going to that school in the 1st grade. And we were there, let's see. Of course, Daddy was back and forth, and my grandmother lived at Thorpe Springs, so there was always coming and going and someone at the farm. But during that period when Daddy was working at the nursery, his sister and her husband did not have a place to live. It was during the deep time of the Depression. So Daddy said, well, you all can stay at the farm. So they stayed up here while we were in Waco, and Daddy was helping with the nursery. And the times were such that you did what you had to do at the time, and that's what we did. I went on to school in Waco, and I got most of my education. I finished at Waco High School in 1943. I caught that half year in between when they added the 12 years. But and Daddy was back and forth and worked at the nursery, but he finally went to work for Gulf Oil. And from that time on, things were much improved. And he bought a home in Waco. And that's where we kind of made the rest of those years until World War II. And when they opened the munitions plant at McGregor, he got a nice job there in the operations department. And they furnished a place to live. It was really a boon to him, to the family. And by that time, of course, I had graduated from high school, but I did work for 1 year after I finished high school, because I did want to go to college, and that was a great expense at that time. So, now my brother, a little backup, it was important for him to go to school.
Oh, sure.
Very important. So he went to A&M, and he finished, what year did he finish? I don't remember. He went to school at A&M and finished at A&M. But I worked that year, and then I decided it was time for me to be a little more independent, that I was grown. So I went to North Texas State and enrolled there, and I finished in 3 years, which was nice. But during that time, I met my husband. He was in school there after the war. He was a pilot, in the Air Force, and he flew missions, and when they started counting the number of missions that they flew, he was able to not go on those missions anymore, and they let him come home early. So he enrolled in school, and he was a sophomore at the time the war started. So he had a long way to go. I finished my degree in 1947. So we settled in Denton then and stayed there until he finished his degree. He was a journalism major.
He was in school at the same time that my husband was at North State.
Was he?
He was in Denton.
Well, it was not a very large school then either.
No, it
No,
wasn't.
we knew everyone on campus, and that's when I had a fraternity, a sorority, and he had a fraternity, and that was our social activity.
Sure.
And my sorority sisters. Now this is a story because there were 6 of us, and we stayed connected for 60 years.
Oh, how
There
wonderful.
are 3 of us left now. One of them is 93, no, two of them are 93. One of them is incapacitated, but the other one, and so but we stayed very close friends for many, many years. And we convened at least once a year, and a lot of times they came here.
Sure.
So this was a celebration of sorts. And our husbands, some of them were friends through their fraternity relationships too. So it was a wonderful, wonderful friendship. But that's, those are some of the benefits you get from college times, I think. And that is just marvelous. And let's see, what else?
When did your daddy move back here to the little frame house?
Daddy came back in the early 1950s.
Okay.
My grandmother passed away. The house was there, the property. No one seemed interested in that property at all. And Daddy really, I guess the fact that nobody wanted it, he felt bad about that. So he bought it and settled it out and tore the old house down and replaced it with the house that's there now. And it was, when they dismantled the old house, it was made of cedar. I thought that was,
Yeah.
where did they get the cedar to build a house? But he used a lot of the old materials in that house. And, but they, that was during the time during the war, or he went to work for that munitions, he worked for the munitions plant, and they called him back, and he engaged him to go to close down these munition plants elsewhere. They spent, they closed down that one in Amarillo, Pantex Ordnance Plant, and they closed one down in Gainesville, whatever that one was, I don't remember. But they spent 5 years in Nebraska closing down a munitions plant. So they really didn't come back to live in Thorpe Springs until after all that time. But that house was there, and they probably rented it or what have you, you know. It was occupied anyway.
I remembered he wasn't always there.
No,
Yeah.
he was in and out. But they enjoyed their time in Nebraska. He had a brother that taught school at the college in Lincoln. So they enjoyed their time up there. But anyway, they had a good retirement though, and you know, they were very comfortable and very happy to be back home. And of course, in Thorpe Springs, he loved his garden. He had a lot of produce, and I can remember being there on a Sunday, and we picked we picked gallons of strawberries. He grew strawberries. And I can remember how many tomato plants he planted. I mean, he worked us to death. Anyway, he loved to grow things and watch them grow. And Mother was good at taking care of the produce too. So, and let's see, after we married in 1947, and then Claude finally got through school, got a degree, we both got teaching jobs in Corpus Christi. So we went to Corpus Christi and really, really enjoyed that. He got a job at the high school with teaching journalism, and I got a job teaching in a public school. It was a junior high level, and I've taught it on all levels. And that's where we raised our family. In between times, I came back to North Texas in the summer and finished another degree. I got my master's in business, but it took me 3 summers to do that because I have to do that when school was out down there, come up here.
So you had children at that time too?
And had children, yes.
Whoa, you were busy.
I was busy, but now I had Claude's parents had property in Denton, and I had a nice place to stay. They weren't there all the time, but it was good for the children and good for me too, because the children learned. I thought it was a wonderful time for them to do things on their own imagination. They had to make their playtime. They had to do things that they had to be creative. And we were out in the country, and so they just made things and did things that really kids enjoyed doing. And sometimes in town they couldn't do all the things that they could do out there. They could climb trees and do seesaws and what have you. You know, it was great. And we did that, and I finally got through with that, and that helped. And when the children were growing up, after the first child was born, I had worked in child development and on part of my education. But I decided that I wanted to take care of my own kids. That if they were going to blame them for things, they could blame me. So I stayed home and took care of the children. I stayed out of teaching for 10 years. When I got them both in public school, I thought I could go back to teaching. And I did kind of part-time, though. I did, lucky enough that a lot of my teaching was in high school. So I got a part-time job at the college. And that turned out to be the fruit of all of it, because I finally persevered, so to speak, and grew in that area. And I spent the next 22 years at the college level. And that was...
What college were you?
It was called Del Mar College, and it was a 2-year state-supported school. And this is at the time when Corpus was really expanding, and Corpus Christi State opened a school, which later became A&M.
Okay.
But when they opened at the junior level, and we furnished the first 2 years, and then Corpus Christi State took them up at the junior level on up, and that's the way it happened, even when, I think when A&M had taken it over. But while I was there, we were always the first freshman, sophomore years. And I taught in the business department, and eventually I taught introduction to business, accounting, and the business courses. And I finally got appointed assistant department, and finally department chair. So, but it was a very active school, a good school. We had a wonderful reputation, and still is. And I was very proud to be a part of it.
When did you come back to Hood County?
We came back here in 1985, and I retired early because Mother had broken her hip. And I came up on Thanksgiving, and I saw that my brother was overwhelmed with trying to take care of everything. Mother, daddy, farm, what have you. And I went back and told them I was gonna have to leave at midterm. So I came back in January of '85. And husband and I lived up at the little house up on the hill here that was built in the late 1800s. But Daddy had always kept it up beautifully. It was well maintained, and it was a gathering place more than anything else. Family felt free to come and spend time, and everybody loved to come to the farm. So that's where we stayed, up there on the hill. And tried to relieve RV of all of the labor. We took shifts at Thorpe Springs, taking care of Mother and Daddy. I guess Mother was well into her 80s then, but she was not in good health. And I don't know just how, anyway, they were aged and needed care. So we made sure that they got that.
And then your dad lived another 10 or better years after.
Yes.
Was he 100 and?
He was 102.
102.
Yeah, we stayed up there 2 years, and during that time, I could see we had a future that looked like caring for our parents. So that's when I built this house. I started and finished it while we were taking care of them.
I see.
And I finished it in '88, I think, yeah. And of course, Mother and Daddy were still in Thorpe Springs. And that's where Mother passed away. But she was bedfast more or less, and had to have a lot of care. And after she passed away, Daddy stayed. But we told him that he was going to have help because he could not hear thunder. He was deaf as a post. He couldn't hear a phone, and he's by himself. So we gave him some options. He can have help there, but he had to have help. Or he could come out here. When I built this house, I had the foresight to say, I'm probably going to need space for Papa. So downstairs is a complete apartment.
Oh, okay.
He had his own private bath, and the laundry room is down there. Everything that he needed. But no, we told him, well, he could go to the little house. It was completely furnished. That would be fine. And that would be like them coming home.
Well, yeah.
You have a choice. Where would you like to be? So he went to the little house. He burned his toast. That ended his career at the little house. He decided he would come down here. So he moved. Now he was what, 96, I guess. Because he lived, now 94. He lived to be 102. He was here. He came after Mother died, and he stayed down there for a while, but not very long. I went down one day and he'd put a for sale sign in his yard. And that house sold before the sun set. So that decision was taken care of.
One of our favorite stories is he came in the bank when he was 99 and got a 2-year CD and said he'd be back to renew it, and he did.
He lacked 3 months making that. Oh, that was yes. He wasn't happy with the 1 year
Yeah, right.
interest rate. He was very frugal. And I suppose that's why he had what he had.
Sure.
Going through the Depression, though, you learned that you didn't waste anything. And it was contagious. I'm that way to this day. So, it lasted anyway. And he was an inspiration always. And I have a lot to, I can never begin to match what they did, ever, ever, ever. But he was out here chopping yucca at 100. He was physically fit. And
It's from clearing all those trees and plowing with a mule.
well, they had
Didn't have a choice.
their lifestyle was such that they had no choices.
That's right.
They worked. I know if we were up here and not out doing something, he'd say, you know, if we were picking up a pound, you're going to lose a crop. And the work ethic was instilled in us. RV was the same way. And yes, they worked all their lives.
What did RV do?
He was an engineer. He finished his degree at A&M, and he became a PE, a professional engineer.
And then Paul's an engineer. Paul's her son.
No, Ronnie was his son.
No, but your son, Paul.
My son, Paul.
Yeah.
His degree, though, is not in engineering.
Okay.
It's in ag eco.
Okay, but he
And-
worked for TechStop.
Yes.
Okay, that's where I got engineering.
Well, he did. He worked with engineers all the time.
Mhm.
And,
Just something in y'all, in the blood with engineers.
well, it's up here.
Yeah.
It's math. I'm not that, anyway, and Clark, see, he's an engineer too. He's an electrical engineer. And that's my oldest son.
Mhm.
And he's also a CPA too, but he didn't use, he uses it all in his work now. But anyway, they both, I said my job is done. They're both grown, educated, and all of them are married now and homeowners. I tell Paul, I'm just an ornament now. That's,
Well, you get to enjoy your great-grandchildren.
I have three grandchildren. The oldest one was here this weekend with their family. She's married, and then we have a 2-year-old. That's the oldest one, and she's a lawyer. And I have a middle one, and that's the one that's going to have a baby tomorrow. It's a C-section. She's a high risk, and this will be the second child for them. But their youngest was here this weekend. That's what all these toys are at. It was so much fun.
Oh, sure.
Oh, you bet. They're toddlers. And then I have a grandson, and he lives in Frisco. And now then the middle child, the one that's going to have a baby, just finished her doctor's at UT last May. And now she's going to have this baby. And she's teaching while she's pregnant at UT on online courses. So she's busy,
Sure she is.
but she's going to be busier.
She sure is.
But her husband has a 3-month paternity leave.
Huh.
He works for Expedia.
Mhm.
So how nice that will be.
Yeah.
And it starts tomorrow. And then the grandson lives at Frisco, and he's a financial analyst for Allstate Insurance.
Okay.
And they have no children, but he is married. So I have a wonderful family. And that's what I give thanks for every day. They are so close and supportive and loving, and they have families. It's a wonderful family, that's all.
Great.
I'm very, very thankful, very grateful.
Understand, you should be.
But I'm old now, and I don't do hurry. And being legally blind, I can't read a book, but I can listen with hearing help. But that's what happens when you get to be 92.
I'm not very far behind you.
Well, I'm just glad to be here.
That's right. I know.
You're hearing better today.
Well, I have my ears in.
You must not have them in when you come to see me.
I may not. But I try to. I usually put them because I can't hear TV real well without them.
Yeah.
So that's an incentive to get busy and put them on.
Well, now for the Hood County history part, now your grandmother was,
A caraway.
and LJ was her father,
Yes.
and then her mother was the Thorpe. Right? There, he
No,
married,
Conaway.
was okay,
A Conaway.
okay.
The Conaways lived a mile up the road.
But LJ's wife was a Thorpe. He married one of the Thorpe girls.
Yes. Was that Nancy? Was it
I think it was Nancy.
Nancy?
Uh-huh. I believe that's right.
Well, there are a lot of caraways that are buried at Biloxi that
Yes.
Mother says they're all my cousins.
Well, now that's, LJ was born at Biloxi, and his daddy was Jesse,
Well,
who donated the land for the Rock Church, the
okay.
Methodist Church at Rock Church.
Well, see, Mother and Daddy bought this land up here from a caraway.
And they bought that from my great-great-grandfather. He was, and great-great-grandmother, that was J.C. and Elizabeth.
Yes, that's who it was.
And that would have been her brother? Would he have been her?
No,
Or
probably an uncle.
Uncle, I was trying to figure it out.
Well, don't.
I'd have to put it on paper.
Yeah, I get it. I have to
Uh-huh.
have the lines,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
but
So your mother and father are buried in Thorpe Spring?
they're buried in that Thorpe Spring Cemetery.
And then his RV there, did they put his ashes there?
No, RV, part of his ashes are right here up on the hill.
Okay,
And a marker for him up here. But his ashes are with his first wife
okay,
and second wife. He had them split. Some
Okay.
here, some there, and
okay.
some here.
Mhm.
And at Thorpe Spring, we have 8 places there. And when I'm buried there, that'll be taken up 4. But I had their markers also for Paul and Renee
Okay,
already. So they'll be buried at Thorpe Springs. We do have that historical marker
mhm,
at Thorpe Springs.
Yes.
It was started in 1850. It's a very old cemetery.
I remember when we did the research on the cemetery to get the marker, that was a lot of work, and it was a big deal to get it.
Yes, Miss Hutchinson helped them with that, I believe.
Uh-huh.
I was awfully proud when they did get that marker. And I am getting a marker for that county park in Thorpe Springs.
Okay.
At least it has been approved and I paid, but we don't have a marker.
mhm.
But we will get a.
Jean's great-grandmother was a Clark,
Clark?
was a Thorpe, and her sister was married to one of the Clarks.
Okay.
So we're kin to the Clarks that, with TCE through the Thorpes.
Pleasant Thorpe. Pleasant Thorpe is my great grandfather.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what,
And he'd be my great-great-great-grandfather.
and that's how I got that park, was he donated that land for that. And he also donated land for the TCU there where that Church of Christ is in Thorpe Springs.
Well, now, where's the park you're talking about?
It's right next to David's grocery store right there at the curve.
Oh, okay.
And it really is, it's a nice, and people go down there and fish at that little creek.
Well,
It's
now-
being used.
We sold that we owned that. When I was little, we sold that to the BRA. The land where Sunrise Bay is, my grandfather Green bought.
I don't know where Sunrise Bay is.
That's where that park is,
No,
across from David's.
it's not, it's on the same side as David's.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's right there at the bridge when you,
Right, I didn't realize there was a park there.
when you look at it when you go back by, there's a real pretty tree.
Uh-huh.
And it goes, the creek goes right
Mm-hmm.
down, and that's where people go fishing.
Yeah. Patty's
And-
dad owned that at one time. And he sold it off to the people that eventually sold it to David's.
I don't know who owned it,
Yeah.
but that park, it's designated by the records to be a park for the county.
Mm-hmm.
And the county has been kind enough to keep it mowed and kept up,
Good.
which I really appreciate. And
Yeah.
I wrote them a note and thanked them for that because it has not been neglected. And so we will get a marker for that and get it, I've made arrangements to get when it does come, to get one with the state of Texas put on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that same record and so forth to get my membership in the Daughters of the Texas Revolution.
Well, now, I've always wondered where the spring was that Thorpe, that people went to
Okay,
for
that,
medicinal.
it's right across the street from that park. See,
Okay.
Daddy owned that little piece too, and he
Mhm.
sold it to somebody with their pile. That little strip, and that's where that spring house was for the pump. I remember this, where they had a little, it was a little covered canopy type thing out over that creek.
That's what I remember hearing.
Yes, and there was a spring, and there was a pump there where you could get water.
And it was just sulfur water.
It was sulfur water.
was
Terrible,
All
terrible.
over Thorpe Springs is bad sulfur water.
Sulfur, terrible.
Black.
And that's what they thought it was
You don't
going to
get
be, a
chiggers.
health.
Uh-huh, you don't have chiggers. Ours, sometimes, it would come out so black, it would stick to your skin
Oh, great.
when you bathe.
Ooh.
And this is what, really, Thorpe Springs was going to be a health kick, like,
Uh-huh.
kind of like mineral wells.
Yeah,
They thought it would be a place for bathhouses and camping and,
and like Glen Rose
yes.
was what it was intended, a
That's-
resort.
And then the brothers, when they opened that school, but listen, that was a big thing back in those days.
Especially when they had women in there too.
They had,
Yes.
a mother lived in a dormitory.
That was liberal. That's very liberal.
Very liberal.
Oh, yes.
And then the boys' dorm was up on the hill.
Yes. And, back then, even education was important always to my family. And they would rent a house in Granbury during the preschool years and move to Granbury so the kids could go to school there.
Mhm.
And then when mother went to college, then she lived in the dorm. And that was 1914, 13, 14, 15, those years.
It was a little like the Sunday houses, only it was for going to school. I remember my dad went to the Harmony School up here, and it only went through junior high, and then they went to a boarding house in Weatherford
Oh, gosh.
So that,
during the week so they could go to high school.
well, back then, you know, people worked. If they were used for labor on the farm and what have you, and family, the education probably was not as important as,
Well, I know that they arranged school for the seasonal crops too, so that, so,
That's why we're off in the summer now.
yeah. That's right.
yes, right, so that they could work for, anyway, times are certainly,
And you talked about your granddad having cotton over here because they had a gin up the road.
that's how Tin Top got their name, because they had a cotton gin. And I guess that's where they took the seed out of the cotton and they didn't, then
It's
whatever,
separated.
they milled it after that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how it got its name. And,
Do you have all of this written? Obviously you do if you're with the, what was the organization that you're,
Your DAR.
DAR?
Or you
no,
don't-
I'm a
Texas.
Daughters of the Republic of
Republic of
Texas.
Texas.
So you had to do your genealogy
I
back.
had to do that, yes, and that's where Pleasant Thorpe was my avenue.
Sure.
to get
do
that.
Mhm.
So,
And I had to have a lot of records to prove all of this.
You have to prove it up.
do you,
Uh,
what I'm getting at is it possible for me to make copies of that so that we would have them at Bridge Street?
Or if you'd let me copy them down at the bank.
My little certificate is right up there that they awarded me finally, but you mean my research
The
material?
research material. Would you let me copy that?
Well, yes, you'd be glad to share.
Okay.
And anything I've got, you know, you're welcome to. You better get it quick though, because I may not be around very.
Because it pertains to me too.
It pertains to you too, yes.
Well, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
at to a certain point it does.
It does, that's
Uh-huh.
right. All of that on the Thorpe side
Yeah.
and the Caraway side.
Mm-hmm.
I know Mother was, her sisters, I remember some of the aunts named Nettie and Amanda and
Uh-huh. Aunt Net.
Aunt Ned.
And some of them called her Mandy. I've got pictures of them.
And Aunt Mandy went to TCU, and
Mhm.
she was one of the oldest people that played the piano. She played there
And,
in her late years.
and they moved to California. I've got some pictures of them back in the 50s.
My goodness, well, I don't have any.
Uh-huh. I've got pictures of them. Well, see, that was my grandparents' aunts.
Okay. Well,
Jake has given me his genealogy of his family, so we need to combine the two to make it bigger.
And then
well, I'm glad that I'm related to him. Very distantly, but that's good.
and then I just recently found a bunch of stuff on the Estises that I didn't have.
Good.
I just accidentally found it.
Well, it's interesting, and it's those tapes that I had did for my mother and dad. Daddies are very detailed. The one I did for mother is not as much, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, sure, sure.
She talked about when they had opened the bridge down here, you know, Tin Top.
Uh-huh.
She took,
The old swinging bridge.
well, the suspension bridge.
Yeah,
Yes.
we called
Yes.
it the swinging bridge.
Yes.
Well,
Did,
that was in 1906.
Did you ever have the pleasure of driving over
Oh yes, with the wooden
the wooden rails?
Ooh, that's-
and one way, and it curved.
It had a curve in it,
It had a curve in it.
and they had it. He drove on slats because it was falling through,
I saw it, but I
It was,
wouldn't
it,
get on it.
Oh, I got to back off of it one time.
Oh,
I
gosh.
bet so. If you met someone you had.
If whoever was closest to the end backed off.
Yeah, oh, the kids used to dive off of it.
Mhm.
It was, but she remembered what she wore. It was such a big thing. You know, and they had a feed, a barbecue meal, big meal after the opening.
Mhm.
She wore little black leather, patent leather shoes, and
Mhm.
you know, it was an exciting time.
For sure. Well, the-
But before that, see, they had to get groceries. They used Weatherford
Mhm.
because they couldn't get up the big hill and going to Granbury.
That makes sense.
And they used Carter Ivy, was that the name of that?
Carter
Yes.
Ivy Hardware.
Hardware. And the only way they would ford that river or once a month, they would get their flour and sugar and what have you, you know, their staples.
Because Weatherford is just closer, and it was bigger,
Oh yes, Weatherford was
a lot bigger.
For sure.
very industrious, you know, it was, and I remember some of the names, the Grandstaff
Mhm.
name from Weatherford
Mr. Grindstaff, the
Yeah.
lawyer.
And they were very good to help Daddy too, because when the Depression, when it got to the point where they had no money to pay the loan, it was probably Mr. Grandstaff that gave them the advice, you know, to go, where to go to get help.
I remember he helped my grandfather.
Well, he must have been very honorable gentleman because he told Mother and Daddy, or told Daddy where to go to get help to keep the farm. And when he went to Houston, and they told him that they did not want or need his land, but if he could pay the taxes until he was able to make payments, that would be fine.
Well, that was.
And this was a wonderful gesture. And so that's what he did. He paid the taxes on it and kept the land. And used, you know, they were in and out here all the time.
And Mr.
Either-
Grindstaff was still practicing when I was little.
Was he?
Uh-huh. Because I remember my grandfather quoting, I went to talk to Mr. Grindstaff today about so-and-so.
Well, that name really stuck up here. But they were very, very good to give good advice. And Daddy seemed to always appreciate that because that's the only way probably that he was able to keep the land. Because it would have been bought up by people that had some money.
Well, keeping it in the family for 100 years is a great feat.
And in a way, it was in there longer than that because he bought it from relatives.
Well, if they went back, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you went back, because he bought it
From a
From-
carrier.
from a Caraway, which was a relative.
Your relative.
Uh-huh. And I bet they lived up there.
Well, they bound to
I
have
bet-
lived in this area.
I bet John and Elizabeth lived up there at the time, because they moved around a lot.
Well, which one was it that had a cancer on his?
That was him. He had I've got a picture, I've saved a picture. He chewed tobacco, and they cut a big place out of his
Yeah.
face. And this was in the 50s.
But he lived.
And he was still alive when I was little.
Well, I remember seeing him. Yes.
And they did plastic surgery of some kind because he has a
He
big
wore.
patch.
He wore a patch. Yeah.
But he had a patch over it.
Yeah.
And because later on you could see where it had been fixed.
Yeah.
Because I have a picture dated 1957 of 4 generations.
Oh.
And you can see where it's fixed.
Well, that's amazing that they could do that back then.
back
That
then.
he lived that long.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, the only health story I have about Papa, he was out chopping yuccas. He got tangled up with some bumblebees, and he was stung fiercely. And we got into the hospital, and his oxygen was just so low. But before that, he had had cancer of the parotid gland, and we'd had surgery, and they knew they did not get it all, and they wanted to do more surgery, but they said he would never be able to eat normally if they did. So RV and I talked about it, and he was 96 at that time, and decided that maybe the quality that time he had left was more important, that he could eat well, than to have it done. But after the bumblebees, the cancer was gone. And the doctor says, I don't understand.
Don't know why.
It's too bad they couldn't study that.
Well, now they're using bee serum. to
Serum
treat
now?
cancer, yes.
Hmm.
But I'm sure that's what, he didn't have to have any more surgery, and he lived to be 102. So, well, I'm just thankful to be as well as I am. I'm and grateful to have had a great life. I'm losing a lot of my friends, though. We just buried one last week. Pat Haygood, his funeral was last Monday,
Oh.
and she was a very dear friend.
She was active in the Genealogical Society and the Historical Society. I remember her. She was a very, very nice lady. Just very nice.
I really miss her. She was a spark, I tell you, and I learned a lot from that friendship.
Well, we certainly appreciate you spending your afternoon with us.
Well, I probably rattled it and didn't get it together as far as years go.
I think you kept it pretty straight.
I think so too.
Well, it's been truthful.
Yeah.
Say that.
Well, I know the story, so I know. You filled in some holes for me.
Oh. Well, I had wonderful, wonderful parents.
Your daddy was well thought of.
Well, you know, he lived here for nearly 8 years. And
Said, oh,
I know.
he said he had no regrets. And I think he had a very, very, very good life.
Well, I'm just blown away at both your father and your mother had the education that they had, which was very rare in those days.
Well, this is what they were all very educated minded. That going to school was very important. And I tell you what, we've had to, Mother kept a little switch in there. I remember sitting at the table having to get those multiplication tables memorized. Freckles.
Oh, that's fine.
and I think
He's
it
fine.
may have been something around here because it seemed like there were a lot of women I've heard of from Granbury that went to school.
Strong women.
My grandmother and her sister went to college.
Well, that,
Well, it was important to me, but it was imperative for the male to go to school.
oh yes,
Mhm.
yes.
This is what Mother and Daddy always, they never did talk about me going to college. It was always RV.
Well, it wasn't, they always assumed that you would get married and have children.
Yes, that's
Right.
the family life.
Yeah.
That's what you were supposed to do.
Well, I tried.
Stay home and have children.
I stayed home for 10 years, but my idea now of all of that has changed since I had toddlers here. Goodness, I was just amazed and what those little children know and can do, and one of them's just 2 years old.
Mhm.
Now, I know good and well, mine didn't do that when they were that age.
What's the difference in technology?
That's right.
What is, yes, that box and the telephone.
My 6-year-old great-grandson can use a phone, an iPhone, a lot better than I can. It's
Well,
just-
see,
Well, I use my iPhone instead of a computer a lot now.
well, everybody does. But I know your age, they have that little and
Yeah.
that's all they need.
Well, that's true. That's all they need to know. It's, and it can entertain them forever.
Well, the worst disability I have is not being able to read. That's,
Mhm.
and my world is about the size of a golf ball.
Yeah.
And I think you have the macular degeneration.
Yes, and
And I think that's genetic because L.J. Caraway practiced law until he lost his sight.
That's right.
But he was still able to farm.
Farm.
He had been a lawyer in Stephenville,
Yeah, that's right.
and he couldn't practice law anymore, so his wife had died, and he moved to Thorpe Springs and married one of the Thorpes and farmed. And that's
Very
where,
successful at it, too.
that's our connection
Yeah.
there. And then I know my dad had it, and now I've had it and you've had it. So I think there's something
Well,
genetic.
Daddy, of course, he lost his vision very early,
Mhm.
but I had a hemorrhage behind one eye back in the 80s, and I lost sight in that eye.
Mhm.
And the macular has
Make it worse.
well, no, my eyes have always been a problem.
But the injections have fixed mine.
Well, they tried those on mine, didn't do any good.
Where do they put the injection?
In my eye,
Oh,
I finally looked at the needle.
just, no, I don't think so.
But Diane, it made the spot in my eye go away.
Go
It
away?
healed it. And so I've got to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you do anything to help.
Uh-huh. I finally got over thinking I need to have a Valium before I went in to get the shot, but I can do it now.
Well, it didn't hurt.
So,
Well, they
Deadened
deaden
it.
it. They double deaden it. They deaden it, then they put a deadening shot in it, and then they give you the shot.
so you have to do it multiple times?
Every 3 months.
Oh,
It doesn't always work though.
Not with
It's a
everybody.
wet or dry macular.
The dry, there's no cure for,
okay.
but the wet, there is. But it didn't help Barbara Boozer. The shots hadn't helped her. But
Well, see, they didn't help me either. but-
it's hard to say.
Well, again, we certainly appreciate this today. This is great.
Well, I appreciate your goodness. I don't want,
Because I didn't know you got this place from Grandpa Caraway. That they got that from him.
well, this whole, all the 265,
Yeah. And I know he bought and sold land all
all over this place. Well, that Pleasant Thorpe's name isn't on nearly, it's on a lot of stuff, up and down here.
And then my great-grandmother White, great-great-grandmother White, had a place right over here.
That was Goldie White.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that
She
was
married a Hodge.
Hodges.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of Hodges up here at the cemetery. And my grandfather Otto Toad,
Yes.
okay, he married a White.
Okay.
And they all lived on this White
Right
place
next
up
door.
here. And she had rent property in Weatherford. This is Warren White's grandmother.
Oh, okay.
Is your head spinning yet? We're all in,
Yeah,
and her
between
husband
you
died.
and Cody, I think you're married to, of intermarriage, the whole
Yeah.
town.
And her husband was a butcher in Weatherford and died young. and she had made money with rent property.
Oh,
And they all told that she was used to being frugal, and you would go to eat at Grandmother White's and she'd give you portions about that big around of the vegetables, because she had fed all these kids on nothing.
Gosh.
well, I think Daddy's family, see, came from farmers too. They had that farm at Leroy.
Mhm.
And he was one of 7 children, and the daddy died early. I think he was just for like 40 something. He had a mastoiditis, and they of course didn't have penicillin then, and that's why the daddy was born after his father had died. But that farm was finally sold and settled in the estate and so forth. And my grandmother remarried, and that's when she moved to Thorpe Springs with these 2 minor children to go to school. And also, I think they moved there because it was dry. There was no alcohol. It was known as the cleanest, purest place to live.
Diane's got a copy of it. I've got a cookbook that was published by the Women's Wednesday Club and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And I thought that's kind of ironic, because the current members of the Women's Wednesday Club like to take a few.
A whole lot.
A whole lot. But they were in conjunction.
I didn't.
And my great-grandfather Estes was the chairman of the men's temperance.
I see.
Mhm.
But if you
Well,
read the Hood County minutes, the Commissioner's Court's minutes, they voted to be dry, and then 6 months later, they'd have it, they'd reverse it, and then they go a little bit more, and then it would be prohibition again.
Well, they had at least one saloon on each side of the square.
Well,
At
Starks, they did
least
have
one.
saloons there, you know.
Mhm.
Oh my. Well, I'm a member of the Wednesday Club too, and it's a wonderful club.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of my associations with Granbury
Mhm.
had developed.
Sure.
The McAllisters,
Vine,
yes.
he had the Ford dealership
And they
across
were
the street
friends of
from me.
mother, yeah.
Okay, oh.
He bought Tommy
had that-
Vaughn.
Didn't they own that corner there where that service
You
station?
know, Ms. Rowe always owned that.
Who did?
Ms. Rowe, she owned
Okay.
it from the beginning. I traced it back when I
Okay.
bought it. And, but now he bought the Ford dealership from Tommy Vaughn. And that's where he started, and then he owns the Vaughn family owns a bunch of dealerships in Houston now.
Oh,
But that's where they started, and then he sold it to Lester McAllister.
well, Ms. McAllister was a good friend of my mother's. I remember.
Did you ever hear her play the violin?
No.
She was a wonderful violin player.
She lived on Doyle Street, because
Mhm.
I would go visit her, and even since we've been, came back. And she's the one that gave me that, I have a tapestry downstairs
Really?
that hanging, that she gave me, and which I cherish very, very much.
You know, the Ford dealership didn't own all the property there, and it belonged to the Church of Christ, and on Saturday evenings, the mechanics had to drive all the Fords inside for the Church of Christ to park.
Oh my. Well, Daddy tells the story that he was at Thorpe Springs when that split happened, and he said, "Play on Bertha,"
Mm-hmm.
that he was there. And I heard that story long before I ever read it in anything. And it split his family. Two of them went Church of Christ and two of them went Christian.
Well, I know our side went, but some of them went both ways.
Yeah.
But the original Caraways were Methodists at Rock Church.
Well, that was good. That was early on.
That was early, and at that time the Methodists didn't believe in dancing. That is the story of the story on why they built the Rock Church was that they had a meeting hall and some of the kids had danced in it, and the Methodists didn't want to meet there anymore because Satan had been on those floorboards. And so he donated the land and they built the church that's there now.
Well, it's a historical place now, I tell you.
Yeah.
It surely is.
This is what I wrote this cemetery where a lot of my daddy's parents, and it goes into the 1800s too, but the people down there, they wrote me back and they listed all the names and the dates. It's a very detailed thing. I can't, I appreciated that so much because going back to great grandparents and what have you.
Sure.
And that's where two of Daddy's siblings are buried. Yeah, it's a very old cemetery. And I don't know with cremation and et cetera now. Now, I don't know. My son has a marker out at the Thorpe Springs. But he said he's going to be cremated. And I said, well, you be sure you put some of it right here. But we've used it so much in these research projects,
And that's right.
it's very difficult,
It messes it up terribly.
terribly.
One thing the Caraways did at Tin Top was they listed their children on the back of the headstone.
Yes,
Well,
I
that
have
was
a
nice.
picture of that. My grandparents are buried at Tin Top, the Conaways.
Yeah, and theirs are that way.
And
That helps.
And then John Caraway, also there's markers along the road telling the history of Tin Top. He had the monument people up at Weatherford carve these. It's like headstones, but it's got the history of Tin Top scattered along the road.
how neat. Well, they gave that community center up there is a donation of the
His brother.
Caraways. And it has on the cornerstone it gives that.
It was two of the boys from up there were killed in World War II, and the Caraways and the other family built the community center in their honor.
Oh, nice.
And it was well used there
It's still
up
used.
until, yeah, still used, but it used to be the 42 play. Everyone gathered for play 42 certain nights of the week. And it was very well used.
Well, again, thank you, and we appreciate you so much.
Well, Diane, I just think it's wonderful that you even wanted this.
Well, I thought about you for such a long time, and I never do anything about when I think about people. But
Well, I've known you. Now you worked with homes, houses. You did a lot of stuff with that. That's my vague recollection
that's yes.
of your.
Now, your husband's kin to the Nixes, or how are you kin to the Nixes at Toler? I forget.
My daughter is married to Lynn.
To Lynn, that's it, okay.
Yeah. And their family goes back forever too.
And then y'all had Leonard's Farm and Ranch. You remember Leonard's Farm
Oh
and Ranch?
yes,
They
it's
own-
Napacan.
They owned that.
Oh my.
For a long time.
Yes, I remember the Leonard. There's a lot of history.
Mhm.
It's a lot of history, yeah. But if you would let Jake
Next
copy
time,
copy
next
that.
time y'all come down, drop it off with me and I'll copy it and get it back to you.
Now, you want the research that I did to get my DRT? Is that what you're asking
Yeah,
for?
the
My
family
DRT?
stuff.
Well, and if at all possible, your interviews with your mother and dad that we could
Well,
have.
now, I'm having those digitized right now
Okay.
to put on disc so that my
Oh.
kids.
We'd love to have a copy of that in the museum.
Yes.
Well, yes, I will do that. And when I get the copies back, because mine is just on a little cassette
Yeah.
that I did. And when I get the copies back, then I can have those reproduced, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I have to have help with all of this stuff. My housekeeper, little Monica, she's the one that found somebody to take those and put them on cassettes. And I should get them back either this week or next week.
Monica's used to work at Ron's. She has the German accent.
Oh, yes.
You know
but
Monica.
she's the one, she works for me, she takes care of me, she's my, that's why this house is a wreck, because Monica's not here.
But you also have the stuff that you brought for Adran, don't you? The scrapbook on Adran? Was that yours? That came,
Yes.
that's another thing that
Yeah.
we'd love to have too for the.
Yes, I have that scrapbook that was Daddy's.
We have
And-
we have a safe storage room for that stuff.
Yeah, we
Well,
do.
I planned to, I'll share all of that, but that book was from 1913, 14, and 15.
Mm-hmm.
I kept wondering why everyone was always so well dressed, white shirts and ties, and every picture, and the women were dressed.
Yeah.
You just did.
Oh my! And back then,
Yeah.
just imagine doing those shirts and all the Anyway, but that's what they wore.
Sure. Well, even the big hats that they.
Yes, hat,
With
they all.
the feathers.
They had hats on.
Yes.
Well, I have a picture of Mother and Daddy on a date in a buggy, dressed. She had on a hat. They had a dog sitting between them in this buggy, and Daddy was holding the gun.
That was the chaperone.
Yeah, the dog.
Oh,
But that, we would certainly appreciate that for the museum. I mean, that's so important, what we're trying to do at the museum, that just tell the stories of
well, I
people.
still have all that together that I took to that lecture that day that
Uh-huh.
uh, they talked about TCU.
They were very impressed with what came in that
Yes.
day. They
Well, listen, John Cleveland,
yes.
his is very well preserved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, get him to donate that, or
Yeah.
I'll corner him.
Yeah.
And he even has the
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah. I had the diplomas.
Now, Lois Cleveland, his mother,
Yes.
was my dearest friend.
I remember Lois.
Oh, yes. And she was, and that's how, John and,
She lived for a long time after her stroke too.
oh, yeah.
Long, long time.
And she got, she was driving when we first started, and then the boys made her take a driving test,
Mm-hmm.
and they told her she could drive to the post office between 2 and 2:30. That's the only time she could get out to go to the post office because there wouldn't be much traffic. But I was her driver.
Mhm.
After that, I took her everywhere.